So that's what we mean by ballot access and petitioning. So let's start with our first section here to do a little bit more talk about what the state and local laws look like. So we'll talk about the laws and rules for petitioning that vary between states and even between cities. Well, what we'll talk about is the commonalities, I should say. Some of these rules can vary between states and cities. So, I'm not a legal expert on all 51 election laws, right? So, I have to add the caveat here of make sure that you check with your campaign, with the candidate that you want to support, or check with your state party if there's any special rules or laws that you should be aware of. Always check that when you're signing up to volunteer, and they'll probably have their own little presentation or training or something like that for you. But what we'll talk about here is the very common stuff that most petitioning systems work like this, and it's only like, minor changes on like timeline or something like that. So we'll talk about the state election laws that are in common. We'll talk about there's been some Supreme Court rulings that affect the petitioning process. And we'll talk about ballot access equity. All right, so first of all, the ballot access laws, it's important to know that there isn't a federal standard. Like I had said, it's really 51 different state elections. There's not really any federal standard or rules or whatever on how the elections work or the ballot access works or the petitioning works. If you run for a federal office, if you run for Congress, for example, or for president, there is the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, that oversees those candidates, but it's mostly in like a campaign finance sort of thing, right? Like making sure you're filing the right forms to declare how much money you've raised and things like that. It's not setting ballot access requirements for the states. Each state can kind of do its own thing. And so that's what we have. We have 51 states that all have their own rules and sets of laws. So it can be a little bit complicated to figure this out on a nationwide scale. These ballot access requirements vary a lot between the states. Like I said, most of the states do it by collecting signatures on a petition, but the amount of signatures you need varies wildly. Some states, it's only a few. Some states, it's, quite literally some of the highest requirements in the entire world in some of our states. We'll get to that in a moment. So generally, ballot access laws consist of some combination of two things. You need to have that petition with signatures from registered voters. Sometimes in some states, the signatures have to come specifically from people who are registered to vote as a Green Party member. But not all states require that. Sometimes it's just anyone who's a registered voter for any party or an independent can sign your form. So that's one of those little differences you have to make sure with your state. The other thing is that very often many states will require, along with this petition, you have to file ballot access filing fees. And again, the filing fees are also a wide range, between like a small copying fee of, $50 or something like that, versus some states it goes up to like, I think Oklahoma was like a $35,000 filing fee. Like if you don't have $35,000, you're not on the ballot. That's it. So, you have to raise a lot of money to even be on the ballot in some states. So these are the challenges we face as the Green Party, that we have to have enough volunteers and all to go out and collect these signatures on petitions. We have to raise enough money to pay the filing fees, especially in certain states. And another complication on top of this is that when we're collecting signatures, you don't get to collect signatures all year round. And just whenever you meet the right number of signatures, then you file it. Most of the state laws actually have a window of time where the signatures are valid. So that means you have to collect your signatures between one date and another date. And if you collect them outside that date, they don't count. They don't count toward that. So for example, in Pennsylvania, when we collect our ballot access petitions, we're not even allowed to start collecting signatures on our petition forms until after the Republicans and Democrats deadline to file to be on the ballot is already over. So when they're out petitioning and they're out getting on the ballot, we're not even allowed to collect signatures. We're not even allowed to do that. If we tried to collect signatures, they would just be invalid. They would get thrown out in court. They would say, oh, these don't count. So we're not even allowed to start petitioning until usually around March. And then we have March until August 1st in Pennsylvania to collect signatures. And that's a longer window. That's a few months. Some states it's more like 6 to 8 weeks or something like that. So I think Arizona or something has to collect the signatures a year ahead of time. So if you want to be on the ballot in 2022, they had to have already filed the signatures, which means they're starting the process now for making sure that they're on the ballot next year, right? So there's a lot of complications on when to collect signatures and all too, in addition to the number of signatures and the ballot access filing fees. So this isn't necessarily, you don't have to be an elections law expert or anything so to be a volunteer, right? Like you don't have to know all the details here, but just kind of making you aware of the challenges that we face in doing ballot access work, really for any candidate, but especially for the Green Party.